Alright, welcome back to the flag project. This is part 8 in this series. This is the bonus tutorial. We're going to go over on how to actually create the final animation output. We're going to actually cache the animation of the flag first. Then we'll do what's known as a play blast, where you can create a little preview of your animation before you do a final longer render animation in Autodesk Maya. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this animation. We'll collapse it. Here we are in our scene, a Maya scene here, where we left off before, and you can see here the geometry. We have the pyramid over here. I think I am going to move the pyramid just over a little bit real quick. So I'm just going to move it over here and pull it in a little bit, just so it's a little bit closer to the flag. And this will kind of represent more of what I had in the animation. I'm trying to recreate the animation I did before in terms of the view and everything. So something like that. And so I have my actual render settings set up, 2048 by 1024, and you can see the little window preview here. What I'm going to do here is first cache the flag. So that's our first thing. So if I frame it on the flag here, um, you'll see what happens when I rewind and hit play. Every time it's calculating based upon the physics of the nucleus in this world environment through the system, how this flag is moving. So every time we rewind and hit play, we get a new animation being created. What we want is we want a lockdown animation. We want it to be, which is known as caching the data of this flag, so that we can scrub backwards and forward. Because right now I can't really scrub. It changes a little bit, but it's not scrubbing backwards and forwards immediately because the animation is constantly trying to update. So what we're going to do here is we're going to cache this flag, and we're going to cache a frame range of maybe 1 to maybe like 200 frames, just for demonstration purposes. I think mine I did 400 frames for the final animation, but just for demonstration purposes we'll have it to 1 to 200. And once we have that set up, we're going to go up here to the FX module, and this will recreate our end cloth. And over here we have this thing called nCache. So we're going to click on this, go to create a new nCache, and go to the end object and click on the options here. This is the type of cache we're going to do, is the end object cache, and click on the options. So first thing we're going to do is find a directory. So we click on this little folder icon, and it's kind of like setting your project. So you click on the little back arrow here, and we want this to be in the cache folder. So once we do that, we click open, and it will now be in the cache folder. Then we can give it a unique name. So I'll call this one flag, I don't know, 10 or something like that, or yeah, I'll call it flag 10. And this cache format as a default format is the MCX. Everything else you can leave pretty much the default. The time slider here is what is being represented down here, which is 1 to 200, which is what we want. So all we got to do to create this cache is click the create button, and then Maya starts the calculation process. So it's actually caching this data into a series of images. And so you can find those images if we go to the flag project in the cache folder, and all the way at the bottom here is the last cache, which is flag 10, and it's rendering out each frame. You can see here it's doing very quickly, so very fast to frame 200. Now we got immediate playback, where I can scrub the data backwards and forwards, which is really nice. And so I can hit rewind and hit play, and you can see it move very easily. Now one thing that's happening here is you'll notice it takes a little while before you start to see a natural kind of flag movement. So we don't want to render out these first couple of frames. So probably around like frame 10, I would say, is a starting frame. So I'm going to type in 10 here, and that will be our starting frame. So 10 is our starting frame, and we'll end it on like, I could end it on 400 or 200 or whatever. I'll go up to 400 here just to demonstrate what it was like for my animation. So we had 400 frames here, and now I'm going to zoom out of here and kind of angle up a little bit, and this is kind of what I had as a starting point, which was seeing the structure kind of from down here. I think it was something like this. I'm not going to recreate the exact animation, but I'm going to show you just the process. So to create an animation, I'm going to use the perspective camera. Now you could choose to create a new camera, but I'm just going to select the perspective camera in here, and we're going to animate that camera. So on frame 10 here, I'm going to start just by hitting the S key, and that creates in the channel box here, all these keys went to red, and then we just move in time. So I'll move to time maybe about, I don't know, 50 frames or so, and then I'll kind of tilt up. So I'll kind of push up a little bit with the middle mouse button, and you can see I don't want this little black corner moving in, so I'm also going to zoom in a little bit, and we'll try that. We'll hit the S key and see if that works. So we got a little bit of pushback, and we don't want the black to show through, so that looks pretty good. Then we'll kind of move more forward in time, and maybe do a tilt up like something like this, and then hit the S key again. So now we're just kind of scrubbing backwards to kind of see. And then somewhere around here, I'm going to zoom in on that flag. So I'm going to hit the F key on it and to frame in on it, and I'll zoom out just so it's easier to kind of zoom out. So maybe somewhere around, well, actually we'll zoom in all the way pretty much like this. We'll hit the S key there, and then the last frames will basically, oh, I know what I did. So I had the flag selected when I hit the S key. I didn't have the perspective camera. So I'm going to frame in again, zoom out just a little bit. This is, so I accidentally added a keyframe to my flag. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to highlight all these keys, right click, and go down to break connections, because I don't want that to be animated. I want the perspective camera to be animated though. So on this frame, I'm going to hit the S key again, and that will kind of end the animation. So let's scrub backwards. You can kind of see how things are going here. And so let's hit play. We'll take a look at it. And it looks like it's going okay. We'll see how fast this zoom is. Zoom is kind of nice and gradual, but it does seem a little extreme right there. But I don't know. We'll see. It's got a few frames there at the end. We could have this go out a little bit further. So I'm going to hold the shift key and select this keyframe, and then just grab the middle arrow here and kind of drag it over a little bit. I think it'd be better to have a little bit more of a transition there. Now this animation playback, if I click on the little gear icon of the little guy here, it'll show my animation settings. So I have it set to 24 frames per second. You can see you can choose all different playback frame rate, and then I have the playback speed the same. Now sometimes it's set to play every frame, so if you want it to look more like what it will actually look like in the render, change that to 24 frames. And so now everything's set up. So at this point I can hit play one more time, take a quick look at it, and it's still looking pretty good, except for, let's see, yeah, right there actually isn't too bad. It's got a push in, and it still gives a little bit of time for the flag to kind of flap at the end there. So to really see this now, we're going to do what's known as a playblast animation. Okay, so I can rotate around here in the scene. I hit the F key on that, and as long as I don't have auto key turned on, make sure this isn't turned on, I can still manipulate this camera, move it around. And you'll notice here you got the grid on here. So we don't want stuff like the grid being visible in the scene here. So we can turn off the grid by clicking on this little icon. To get rid of any other data information, like the nucleus here has like the direction of the wind and so forth, you can go to the show menu here and you can turn off everything by going to none. Then go to the show menu and go down to polygons, and that will show all the data that basically we just had here. And so now we will just render the data information here in the playblast. Okay, so now to create the playblast, all you gotta do is right click in here, go to playblast, and go to the options. And then once we do that, we'll hit edit and reset the settings just to show what everything is set up by default. And you can leave pretty much everything the default format here, the format, AVI, and all that. The one thing I do want to do is save the file. So I'm going to check this little box, save file, and it will, you can browse to a location, which I'm going to put it in my movies folder in the flag project, and then give it a unique name at that point. So I will call this one flag 10, for example, and then hit save. And so now flag 10 will be in here, and that's the file path. So at this point I can click Playblast and it will start rendering. Now I did have this selected down here, so that's why it's showing up green. So it will record anything that you have selected. So if you didn't want that, you could hit deselect. I'll show you how to do that. It's okay for me if I'm just trying to see the animation. It doesn't really bother me for this. I'm just testing to see how everything looks in terms of the animation. But the Playblast movie will open up after it's done rendering here in just a sec. So here it is, and you can see the green was selected there. It's okay. But this gives me a little idea of like the quality of the animation in terms of like the flag movement and stuff. You're not going to get like a high render. It's a very low end kind of render, but it gives you the feeling of the movement. So it's a way to test your animation. So this shouldn't be thought of as like the final animation output. To deselect this, all you gotta do is go to the select menu and go to deselect all. And then you can do the play blast again. Just right click, play blast. But again, it doesn't bother me. I've already done the play blast, so it's okay. After that, we basically can render out your final animation if you like it. So you click on the render settings here. And again, I'm choosing 2048 by 1024 here as my render settings. And in the Arnold renderer, I have the default settings typically set up. I did increase this a little bit. The camera set to 5 samples instead of 3, and the diffuse and specular set to 3, but you could have them set to the default, the 2 and 2. So it'll take just a little bit less time or a long time to render depending on which setting you go at. And then here's where you give it a title. So you could call it like flag, whatever. And then the format you want. So EXR is the format I'm going to choose, but you could choose JPEG or PDF or not JPEG, I mean PDF, but JPEG or TIFF, PNG is okay too. But the EXR, especially if you're going to do transparency, EXR is a really good format. It just seems to render really well. And then down here, this is usually set to single frame. So you want to click in here on the frame animation text and choose the name, number, extension. And that will give you the ability to add your frame dimensions here. And usually it gives you default padding here. And you can see what's happening. The padding, the extension number is increasing here. So I just get rid of padding to 0. And then have a start frame, which for us would be 10. And then the end frame would be 400 for this particular animation. Right, so I'd type that in there. And then I'd choose the camera, perspective camera. So if you had another camera set up, it would be in here where you click on the drop down list. And then just double check your render settings. After that, everything is good to go. The main thing you want to think about though is your path. So if you didn't set your project properly, this path might be a different location. It should default to your images folder in your project. So mine is. So that's all set up. And then all I have to do is go to the render settings here. Save my file, probably at the end here, and then go down to render and choose render sequence, and then it would start the rendering process. So once those are rendered, and I'm not going to render this animation because I already have one rendered, I would then bring the files open into After Effects. So I have Adobe After Effects here open, and I'm going to close this little window here. And to bring them in the project window, I can double click in the gray area here, and you can use other software out there that will allow you to compile images. I just like the After Effects. I have it, so it's usually a pretty good one for me. But mine was called Flag 7, and it started frame 6, so I'll select that. And then its OpenEXR sequence is the sequence of images. So if it was a JPEG, it would say JPEG sequence. And you want to select that and click Import. And then all you got to do is drag it to the stage here, this icon, and then tap spacebar. And what's happening here is it's caching in a RAM. So we talked about caching before, the geometry to finalize the animation, lock it in. This is essentially caching in a RAM so that the playback will be sort of normal speed. And it takes a few moments here for maybe a minute or so but once it gets all the way over to the side here, the green, I'll go ahead and pause it here and just scrub backwards, and you'll see that this much has been cached. So this is real-time playback right now. Notice there's a little flickering icon here in the animation. You might have some little errors here like that. There's a good effect that will kind of get rid of that. It's in the effects and presets in After Effects, and you can just type in the word motion, and it's the CC force motion blur. Typically with things that are animated, you have a blur in the scene. So I'm going to drag this icon to the stage here and release, and then I'll get the force motion blur samples. I usually change this a little bit higher, maybe to like 12, and then it will kind of clear up that little bit of data, and we'll create a slight blur effect, because otherwise you have perfectly framed images that are perfectly frozen. They don't have any natural blur in there because we didn't check blur in the options in Maya. So then when I'm done with this, if I'm like, okay, I want to render this out as a final animation, I select my composition here by clicking on the window, go to composition, and go down to add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. And Media Encoder is a great outside sort of Adobe product that will allow you to render out the animation in a nice format called H2.64. So I'm going to click in here and it'll open it up. And so here it is open. And what we can do is uncheck export audio. We don't have any audio in the scene. You can actually preview what this will look like just by scrubbing it forward here. But essentially, that's all you gotta do in here is export, uncheck export audio, and the default settings are really good for H.264 in here. And then I'll go to the output file and then give it a unique name. So this one I'll call like flag 10. And then I would just want to locate the movies folder. So I have that in the flag project here. There's a movies folder here, and this is where I would save that file format at, and I would hit save. Then all I gotta do is hit the playback, and I've already rendered this out, so I'm not gonna hit play. But what would happen is it would start counting down, and then you would hear a ding at the end here, knowing that this is baked, and then you would have your final animation. So here it is one more time. Here's the final animation in Autodesk Maya. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial series. Flag Chapter 8 is a bonus tutorial again on how to create the animation. Until next time, see you soon in Autodesk Maya. Cheers!